Hey guys, it's Liv here, and in today's video, we're going to be ranking every single Pokemon so far seeming to be coming back in Scarlet and Violet in the VGC metagame. Last week I did the singles one, and you guys seemed to really like that video, and I know a lot of you guys were looking for the VGC list, because typically I rank it on both, but with the tier list going over 200 something Pokemon, it's really hard to get that sort of viability done like I do with the types. But if you guys do enjoy this type of content, and you want to see more like it, leave a like on the video and subscribe, and comment down below what you guys want to see next for the Scarlet and Violet pre-metagame discussion videos. But with that said, let's start off with this tier list. So just like with last time, I did rank everything ahead. There was 200 something Pokemon to rank. It would have been too much for one video. I will also say though, this tier list has two new Pokemon that were not mentioned in the last one. The first being Toxicroak, because Toxicroak was actually confirmed as of the Bellybolt trailer to be in Scarlet and Violet, so I added it. The other one being Blissey. Now, Blissey was a Pokemon that I did actually forget, and I did realize this going into the Scarlet and Violet singles vid, and I think I even mentioned it in there. But basically with how I did the tier maker, I made the same tier list, and I just took out the mons that were necessary. So if I was to have, let's say, edited the tier list and added in Blissey late game, I would have needed to completely redo at least one of the tier lists entirely because it wouldn't save both as separate entities. So basically just blame tier maker on that one, but at the same time it's a really convenient feature and it's how I did the tier list so quickly to begin with. I just didn't want to have to redo stuff just to add in a single OU Pokemon that I could just mention by hand. So both of these actually visually made it onto the tier list this time. For anyone who's curious about where Toxicroak would have been if I knew it was confirmed in the game by that point, would have probably been in the UU, RU, or NUP range. Probably NUP range in all honesty, but here we go for the VGC tier list. So what I will say as well before scrolling up, for the VGC tier list, I had to do this a little differently because VGC only has one actual format. So what I did, I made first an unusable tier, we made a niche Pokemon tier, a viable Pokemon tier, I should still expect these tier, top 5 to 10, and restricted. So restricted did get tweaked into restricted/home for the pre-home, for the pre-home metagame, because obviously a lot of the Pokemon will probably be, such as regional forms, certain legendaries, etc., will be only available in the post-home meta. So I made that combined tier for the post-home list, but otherwise though it's the same list. Because realistically, every single Pokemon that's actually here that is restricted also would have fallen into the home overlap anyway. This list, I'll go over a couple really big ones. For one, no Magearna, so anyone who hates Series 13 because of Magearna, we got you covered. The other one really being Ashgren, and Ashgren might be one that sticks out a little bit here, mostly just because of the fact that some players might not even realize that Ashgren would qualify as restricted, but it actually does. It's an event-exclusive Pokemon, technically, and not only this, but Ashgren was restricted through all of the Gen 7 metagame, so I can't really assume that Ashgren wouldn't be restricted here, unless there's some, like, in-game gift for it, then maybe they'll make it a non-restricted, but even still, they didn't make Deoxys a non-restricted in VGC Gen 6 formats or Gen 7 formats, despite having it literally as a catchable Pokemon in Gen 6 for Oras, so I doubt that would actually be the case. I did just want to mention that though, because just like with last time, I'm assuming that any possible form of the Pokemon can be in, even if Ashgren is probably going to get the Spiky Pichu treatment and never be usable in game again. With that said though, let's go over what the tiers actually mean outside of the restricted, because that one's pretty easy. It's for Pokemon that are just flat out not allowed, whether they're mythicals and they'll most likely never be allowed again, besides maybe another Series 13 style format, or just Pokemon that won't be allowed until the final year of the generation like they typically do. So top 5 to 10, these pretty simple. Pokemon I predicted roughly to be in the top 10-ish range. It's not 10 here, but they're Pokemon that I figured at least are like guaranteed spots. These are Pokemon that really do control VGC, and they're things that you need to expect on literally every team you play. They should still expect these tier. These are Pokemon that I would say, if you were to, let's say, go to like just a random regional, I would say that it is very likely you will play these Pokemon at least a single time in your given regional. If not, you will at least know someone who personally did. These are Pokemon that still are pretty common. There's still things you at least need to keep in mind when building, especially if they're on a surge, because these will put you Pokemon. It's not like with, for example, let's say, hypothetically, there's some Crabominable surge. That might be something that like you'll finally see in a tour, and maybe you'll get like a top cut or two with it, but you won't see this on like 20, 30 different teams in that 256 signup, let's say. With these Pokemon though, if there's, let's say, a Gyarados surge in usage, it's probably already on like 20 teams to begin with, so maybe that's not like 50 or 60 teams, and there's a pretty likely chance you might play it. For the viable Pokemon, these are Pokemon that I would say you'll probably see like once in a tournament, or you might see in a couple games during Battle Spot, and I think they still have actual usage, but I wouldn't say these are Pokemon that you need to really be building your team around and beating. These are Pokemon that you'll probably play in a given set, but most likely speaking, your team does not need to be designed to beat these Pokemon, if that makes sense. Niche cases, these are Pokemon I wouldn't prep around. They're probably Pokemon you might see once or twice in like a month set, but they're Pokemon that I think in the right situation could actually be pretty viable, specifically with a very specific team comp. For example, Charizard might be a really good Pokemon if you're going with like a hard Sun team, or maybe you might use Sneasel if you're pairing it with Colossal, because that was typically a core that people ran. However, outside of these like really one-off cases, you're probably never seeing these Pokemon. And then finally, we have the unusable tier. In my opinion, these Pokemon are probably going to be unusable for the entire format. This list is obviously a lot bigger than the low tier for unusable for singles, and that's because VGC only has like one actual tier. You're not seeing like a VGC UU, RU, NU, etc. So sadly, a lot of these Pokemon just probably will suck. Maybe they'll get like a team or two, or maybe early gen they'll be really fucking good, but most likely these will never actually be mainstays of the gen. So let's actually start with these. I think this is the more interesting side of things personally, and I'll go over some really noteworthy ones. For example, Kleavor. Kleavor is a Pokemon that I think actually will be amazing in singles, but I think it's going to be terrible in doubles. And the biggest reason for that actually comes from Sheer Force. Now, Sheer Force is the reason I think that Kleavor will be really good in singles, but in doubles, I think this actually hurts it a lot. Specifically because of the one move that takes advantage of it being Rock Slide. You can't actually get a Rock Slide flinch with this Pokemon, which is really fucking terrible. And while you could make the case of, let's say, just don't run Sheer Force, which is a pretty fair argument. However, I would also like to argue, how would you like to do significantly less damage with your Rock Slide with Kleavor? To be fair, Steadfast actually could be a kind of cool ability on this, and I think of anything this tier, truthfully, Kleavor is the most chance of being used of anything besides maybe Thundurus, Therian, and Greninja. But even still, I think it's such an unlikely case, and the hoops you need to do to make this Pokemon really viable, at least off of what it stands for moveset-wise right now, would be pretty astronomical. Now, I will say if this thing gets like an Earthquake or something, or maybe some other moves to take advantage of Sheer Force that are really good, I could maybe see this being a thing on Tailwind teams, but without Pokemon like Whimsicott to get the Prankster Tailwind off, the options are, albeit not terrible, but they're a lot worse for Tailwind users to begin with, so I don't actually think this will sadly see usage. Some other noteworthy Pokemon, as I mentioned, Greninja. Greninja I actually do think will be a pretty cool Pokemon as far as VGC goes, and of everything here, I truthfully think it's actually the best one in this tier. Of anything in this range, I think this is the most likely to actually see a tournament usage or so, to where it will maybe get like a top 16 or top 32, and this is specifically because of the speed stat and the move Map Block. Now, to be fair, we don't actually know if Map Block will come back, but Map Block was one of Greninja's signature moves actually as of Generation 6, and it's a pretty damn cool move. Basically, this is a no priority version of Protect, but it protects both Pokemon on the field. So I can go for Protect, for Map Block and Greninja, and it's a naturally fast Pokemon to begin with. Now both of my Pokemon are protected, and I get a free turn to go for some sort of setup move or some sort of really good game-breaking attack that I need to. Maybe I'm going for Trick Room for better field positioning for later. It doesn't really matter, but the move itself is actually a really amazing move, and it's really the only reason that Greninja has any usage to begin with, and I use that very fucking loosely because Greninja's usage is like decimals, like 0.33 I think was what it was in 2018. It's very slim, but it's actually a kind of cool tech that Greninja has, and of anything on this list in the unusable tier, I truthfully do think it's the one that has the best potential. But at the same time, there's a lot of other better fast Pokemon that can just get outright really good damage off, and I think that unless if Protean gets some really nasty broken buff with Terastal, which it could, we don't actually know definitively how the mechanic works yet, even though we have a lot of hints at how it might work. If it becomes really broken with Protean, that's really the only other reason I could see this being used. But as far as the last really noteworthy Pokemon in this range, we do have Thundurus Therian, which I think will be the last Pokemon here that could actually get some usage, and it depends on how good the electric meta is. This is a Pokemon I think could, in theory, maybe be really good on Tailwind, but again, I don't think Tailwind's that good this gen. Thundurus Eye just has so much more support it can offer. I feel like you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot using Therian form. It's a Pokemon that's not really bad, but when you're considering, do I use Thundurus Incarnate, which will give me a lot of Prankster support, stuff like Scary Face, Thunder Wave, Prankster Taunt, even just Defiant for potential Intimidate users. It's a really good moveset, and not moveset, just general build that you can form with Thundurus. Whereas with Therian, it's, does my team want an electric immunity, and does it not want to run a ground type? And if the answers are both yes, you're running Thundurus Therian. So I think there is a genuine place for it, but the issue is the place for it exists over Thundurus Incarnate, which is such a good Pokemon, I sadly do think it'll be outclassed. There's a couple other Pokemon that can maybe see usage, like like the Slowkings, for example, regular Goodra, Hydreigon even, but they're all Pokemon I think that are so niche that it's most likely not going to actually be a thing. As far as the niche Pokemon tier, speaking of, these are some pretty interesting stuff. A few noteworthy things in this tier: Charizard. Charizard will probably be one of the better solar power mons as far as Sun goes. It's one of those things that I know that typically this generation, you see a lot of people say, oh, you know, you're really bring Charizard to Imagine, not going for a Gigantamax, which is really important because Charizard, that made Charizard like a really top tier Pokemon this gen, and it's the first time it's ever really been that demanding in VGC. But now that nothing can Dynamax, Charizard's no longer held back by that, and a Terrestrial Fire with solar power could potentially be really good, and I think that could actually be a really damning thing. Or even just going for Terrestrial Flying, which could also be really good because your Hurricane is limited by Sun. So depending on how good Terra Blast is, this could actually be a viable way to get some extra flying damage off. So I do think that Charizard has an actual place in Sun teams, but it's going to be nowhere near where Charizard was this generation, in my opinion. As far as other noteworthy things, Pikachu will probably win a regional, or at the very least come top 8 at some regional. Let's be honest, there's never really been a generation it hasn't, as far as I'm aware. Usually at least once in like the 3-year span of a gen, Pikachu will do some sort of impressive performance just because someone really wants it to. It's just how the meta will go. I don't think Pikachu will be some really good Pokemon. At the worst case scenario, even if it doesn't top cut a regional, Pikachu's gonna have some really big YouTuber thumbnail where someone's using it in the master tier and it does pretty good in the game. Worst case scenario. So I don't feel bad about putting Pikachu here. It's unironically probably not even the worst Pokemon here, if I'll be honest. Nidos will be probably fine. AI will be fine with Pincurchin. I think we'll maybe see a team or two with that does pretty well. Jigglypuff. Jigglypuff's an interesting one because we don't actually have Clefairy for Friend Guard anymore. So I think that Jigglypuff has a case to actually get used. And I put this very loosely, to be fair. And it's purely off the fact that Jigglypuff actually gets a lot of the same support that Clefable did and Clefairy did. If we look at Jigglypuff and its status move pool, this gets, for example, stuff like Ally Switch, which is really good for singles. For VGC, you get Teleport and Wish, which are kind of okay. You'll get stuff like Heal Pulse, which is good support. Albeit, you don't get stuff like Follow Me, for example, which is a little bit annoying. But you still get enough support, and the support you get is actually different. Because while you're not going for Follow Me, Ally Switch is still a very fucking annoying redirection option that can, in theory, still have the same sort of mind games that Follow Me would have, albeit just in a different sense. So I think this could actually still have some usage with Friend Guard. And even outside of that, you'll still get some options like Parasog maybe, so you could pair this with Goth and just start ransacking people. You get options like the dual screens, for example, which would still help a lot with tanking hits. So I don't think Jigglypuff will ever be as good as Clefairy was, but I still think it will get usage. And I still think this will actually get like multiple top cuts just because of the fact that Friend Guard is such a good ability. And similarly to Dynamax, where you needed the Friend Guard support to take certain Dynamax moves, I think it'll be used in that same fashion to take on certain terrestrial hits. And Jigglypuff with a Violet does have that niche over another Friend Guard Pokemon, which I'll go over later. But we do have a second one this generation, and I did rate it slightly higher. But again, I'll get into that in a bit. Alolan Persian, just to go support Pokemon. I'm going to kind of skim through these for some interesting ones. Arcanine. Arcanine, I think, will actually be pretty interesting, purely because of the fact that it seems to get Rock Slide at the very least right now, which is really good, especially with the fact that this is still slated Intimidate, which is great. You'll get Rock Slide and Flamethrower, or not Flamethrower, Flare Blitz, which is great. I kind of wish this got Reckless, and if it did, I think that would actually put it in a whole different tier. But even still, Intimidate is pretty good. This could be a really cool Trick Room option. Not Trick Room, Tailwind option offensively. And the typing offensively is at least really good, especially if you're going to consider like Terrestrial Rock or Terrestrial Fire. Two very hard types for a lot of these Pokemon to switch in on, and they're two very different types to counter. So I think it might have some niche usage, but it's just an inferior Arcanine. Slowbro, I mentioned that in my Belly Bolt vid, if you guys want to watch that. Really good Pokemon, I think, to support a Belly Bolt, and I think it could be a very interesting Trick Room option for specific teams. Hisuian Electrode's a cool one. I think it's purely just because it's really fast. It's probably the fastest Pokemon we have right now that's even remotely usable, on top of also the fact that it's electric plus grass, which is pretty decent offensive typing. We'll maybe see a Tauros with it, and I think it kind of just depends on how good Chloroplast is. Ditto's Ditto. Vaporeon, I think, will be a cool bulky water, especially with the support moves that Eevee gets. Same as Espeon for similar reasons, but for Fast Psychic. Murkrow is a pretty decent prankster Pokemon. We've seen it actually do well in a few metagames here and there. Sneasel, as I mentioned with the Coal example, I think it'll just be on Coal teams specifically. Blissey, has some okay support. Raptors Intimidate. Pidgey, just in general, has a lot of good support moves, and I think that ever since Adrian used it pretty well, I think the precedent's there to do another regional with it. And I think that this would be the gen to do it, if anything. I think that there's enough going for Pidgey to where it could unironically maybe be a good fat breaker, but at the same time, though, I don't know if we'll need that. Again, similar to Thundy T, it's going to depend on the electric meta, in my opinion. Really's been pretty good with this format. I can't imagine it won't do at least okay. Abomasnow is actually an interesting one, because I was looking through, and unless we get some new Hail Setter, this is actually the only Hail Setter we currently have slated for Scarlet and Violet, which I found very interesting. So unironically, if you're looking to do a Veil team, Scarfed Abomasnow is probably your way to go, because otherwise you're going to be too slow to do it. And this does actually open up the potential of maybe Veil becoming a Trick Room strat, which I do think there's actually a few Pokemon that could take advantage of this later on. So I think that Abomasnow might unironically have a place in the meta, but Hail is going to go down significantly, especially Veil. I don't think it's going to be some sort of Pokemon you're going to see like 3 or 4% usage on, but I think Abomasnow might finally hit a single % usage. It's going to be very interesting to see. I think that Abomasnow, again, will probably Veil will most likely probably relegate itself to Trick Room, which I also don't think Veil will entirely need anyway, because Hail is, well, not Hail, Trick Room is typically a bulkier strat, so you don't really need that same kind of bulk supporting move. So we'll have to see. I think that the screens meta will now become dual screen instead of Aurora Veil, unless we get a new Hail Setter, or if Vanillix and A9 sneak their way in. Magnezone could be interesting. I purely rated this actually because of the fact that I think there's a lot of Pokemon that could in theory become Terrestrial Steel. If there aren't really any viable Terrestrial Steel users though, Magnezone will not be viable. Just if there are, then Magnezone will go up well. Lilligant, because it's Sun and After You, it's actually probably the best abuser we have of it that's in the game. Similarly, we do have another Pokemon that I did rank later on, and that's the only one I think is better. But there are give and takes. For example, Lilligant's the special attacking version of this. It's only got a Pure Grass typing, which is pretty good. So I think that in theory there's merit for this, especially because Lilligant could in theory become a Terrestrial Fire option with Terra Blast and clear a lot of common counterplay. And while I know typically you'd probably want to go for a stab option, I think that Lilligant still has enough going for it coverage-wise to where the typing would be covering something pretty unique. And also because Lilligant's coverage is really garbage, so you probably want to go for a non-stab just to gain an extra option offensively speaking. Hawlucha, kind of okay on terrains, maybe Psychic Terrain if anything. I don't think Electric Terrain will be that good outside of A-Rai plus Pincurchin. Avalugg will be pretty cool for Trick Room, specifically Hisuian form. Similarly, Crab, I think these two will be interchangeable if a team really wants an offensive Ice type, because they're both around the same speed stat. I think that Crab will be slightly better, but we'll see. Oricorios are pretty interesting, actually. I think it's going to entirely depend on stuff like Volcarona usage or other Quiver Dance Pokemon. But in theory, this could actually be a pretty cool option. Oricorio actually did some okay work on very niche situations in Gen 7, and I think it'll carry over pretty similarly. Lurantis could be kind of cool in Trick Room. Greedent could be kind of cool in Trick Room, especially as a Belly Gym Pokemon. This might unironically take over the Snorlax role because I don't think we actually had Snorlax confirmed yet. So this could actually be something there as far as a Greedent meta. Dreadnought and Barraskewda for Rain. Toxtricity, probably Terrestrial Normal in all honesty as just a Shift Gear Breaker. Could be pretty interesting. Stonejourner, just because Power Spot's pretty cool. Indeedee Male, I think Indeedee Male might actually be not bad. We don't have a ton of great Trick Room options, though the ones we have are very fucking good. So there might be a case for maybe Indeedee Male is brought over female just to set Trick Room, because it's actually the only form of Indeedee that gets Trick Room. Pretty interesting, I know, but I've learned this recently. If you were to look up Trick Room and Psychic, and you were to also look up Normal, just to pull up Indeedee specifically, it is only the male form that gets it. Oranguru is another option, obviously, but Oranguru I don't actually think was confirmed, or if it is, I just forgot to put it on here, or the placement. The only other one that would get that with that typing would be like Girafarig, Meloetta, and Weirdeer. So again, not Indeedee female. So this could be good for roll compression in that regard, but I think female will just be the better option again. Its support moves are crazy good, even outside of Trick Room, and a lot of the Psychics it's pairing with for Psy Spam would have Trick Room anyway. The Basculegions. The Basculegions are both interesting. I think that female will be slightly better, but sadly I think they're both too fast to be good on Trick Room and too slow to be good on Tailwind. And even still, again, Tailwind's gonna be a lot worse, and I think that would arguably be the strat where it'd be better on. I think they'll both be kind of niche, but we'll see. Overquill will be interesting. I think that Quillfish Hisui will be better because of a Violet, which I specifically mentioned because of Item Clause. And I think the fact that it's in a Violet Pokemon and it's one of the only ones that would really run it, the only other two being Jigglypuff and Murkrow. So unless if you're really trying to run both of those, I think that Overquill will be the worst option. And even still, you probably would never actually pair this with Murkrow. I guess really will be the third, but even still, I think that actually runs Focus Sash. The point being is that really Jigglypuff is the only partner I could see with Overquill where you would actually prefer it over Quillfish, and it's specifically because of a Violet. But if we're moving on though, we have the viable Pokemon up next. So this includes some really good ones. For example, Golduck will probably be one of the better Swift Swim Pokemon we have right now, actually. And also the fact that Golduck could potentially, on certain builds, run Cloud 9 to get around other weather teams could be pretty interesting. Alolan Muck will probably be fairly viable, just considering the fact that even in 2017 VGC, Alolan Muck was still actually a pretty decent Pokemon, despite how many top tier grounds we had. Between Garchomp, Mudsdale, Crocodile, all of these really threatening grounds for doubles that were in the tier, Alolan Muck was still one of the best Pokemon in the format. It's a great Tapu check, and while those don't exist right now, there's still a lot of other top tier fairies, stuff like Sylveon this could be pretty good at checking, despite the neutrality. You could also potentially use this as a good ghost type sponge, which could be pretty valuable actually, considering some of our niche Pokemon like Gengar or even higher tier ghosts like Dragapult. This could be a really amazing check for it. So I think that Alolan Muck will have a place. We have some other decent Pokemon in here, like Galar Articuno, for example, could be interesting on Psyspam, actually. That could be a really decent option for Tailwind Psyspam. Actually, does that get Tailwind? I'm unsure. Does this get Tailwind? It does get Tailwind. So actually, yeah, that could be a cool option for Tailwind Psyspam, because I believe this also gets Expanding Force. Some other decent options in here. We have Azu, could be pretty interesting. It's one of the better offensive fairies. The Quillfishes I've already went over. Umbreon's always just kind of an okay Pokemon in VGC. It's never really unviable, and I would say it's a little bit above niche in a lot of metas, just because of the combination of the support moves you get. Stuff like Snarl, Well Self-Sustain, and Heal Bell, all really good options. You also get Helping Hand, which is really good, because it's an EV support move. So I think it'll never be an unviable Pokemon in this format. And I think truthfully, this will be a better format for it than Gen 8 was. We have Raichu, always a decent support option in Rain. Beryllium's always not a terrible Pokemon, and I think truthfully Loaded Dice could be interesting on this. Someone actually commented that they thought Beryllium could be really good with Loaded Dice, and that I forgot to mention that. And that was intentional for singles, but in doubles where there's Item Clause, I think this could actually have merit. You could potentially, if it's not a consumable item, utilize some Beryllium and just Bullet Seed spam teams with Terra Grass, and I think that could be really deadly as an option to alternate with Life Orb. So I think that in VGC, this might actually be an item you would consider. In singles though, I think you'd probably just go with Life Orb or Toxic Orb, both of which would be better. Toxic Orb for the sustain and the immunity to poison. Meanwhile, Life Orb would be great for boosting stuff like Focus Blast and not Focus Blast. I was gonna say Focus Punch, but I actually meant Mach Punch. Or if you're going for Rock Tomb, the point being is I think it would just be a better option. But for doubles though, where you have the Item Clause, Loaded Dice might be good. Guard could be a pretty interesting mon, just off of typing alone. It'll be a little weird though. Hariyama will be an amazing Trick Room fighting type in my opinion, especially with options like Fake Out. This could be a really damning breaker for a lot of teams. Sableye is really good utility wise. I think this was probably the worst gen we had for it just because of how many good Prankster Pokemon were in, but this is probably the best Prankster option we have right now, so I think Sableye will be great. Drifloon will be pretty cool with Unburden. Toxicroak is always a decent option for Rain, albeit it's definitely better on Rain and restricted metas, but it's still not a Pokemon I think will be unviable. Weavile's gonna be pretty decent, and I think this meta will be a lot better for it without Dynamax. It doesn't have to worry about taking out really bulky Pokemon, and instead Weavile could be the offensive Glass Cannon breaker. So I think especially with Weavile being only outsped naturally by Hisuian Electrode, Talonflame, and Dragapult, and I guess Barraskewda too, actually. As far as I'm aware, that's the only 5 Pokemon that actually do naturally outpace. I'm sure I forgot a Pokemon or two, but there's very few that do, and most of them are niche at best. So I think that Weavile might actually have a place in the meta this time around as a really good offensive Pokemon. The Rotoms will be decent. They usually find a way in the non-restricted metas to at least be usable. Hisuian Lilligant is the only After You Pokemon that is faster than regular Lilligant. And I think it does have a niche of being a really fast physical chlorophyll option. Its 105 speed is really good for Sun. And not only this, but it's being 15 base faster than Lilligant is really huge actually for the speed difference with Torkoal. Especially with chlorophyll, this would be faster than any other weather option besides Barraskewda. So I do think that will actually be a pretty unique thing. And also Huzzle sets are pretty decent too. They could be really good, albeit Without Dynamax guaranteeing accuracy, it's definitely not going to be as good, and you probably won't see a top cut with like a Hustle Durant, and with Hisui and Lilligant being hustled like you did with Durant doing it several times, but I still think it'll be usable at the very least. Still definitely a Pokemon to watch out for in my opinion. Bisharp's probably one of the better options around Intimidate that we have right now, especially with Defiant, and Terra Dark or Steel could be really good. Volcarona with Rage Powders can be great, as well as Quiver Dance sets will be decent. Torn, great Prankster option. It's probably the best Prankster Tailwind option, and truthfully, I could have even probably put it a tier higher. But Torn never really tends to be one of the best Pokemon in the format. I think the best we've seen it is in like VGC 19, was probably the best meta Torn ever had. But still, I don't think it'll be in the consistently seeing Pokemon, but maybe. Talonflame will be decent. Vivian was the front guard Pokemon I was mentioning later. And earlier on, this one could be interesting, and I think the support moves are actually what gives it a slight edge over Jigglypuff, because the support moves in this are Rage Powder, which is a redirection, and it's a consistent redirection that you get, which Jigglypuff doesn't have. You get Tailwind, which is really good. You also get Sleep Powder, which is really useful for just outright stopping Pokemon from setting up, and as long as they don't change how Sleep works, this could be pretty good. So I do think Vivian has an actual place. But at the same time, though, Jigglypuff, I think just being bulkier could be pretty useful. So we'll have to see. I think this is a genuine toss-up for which one will be better. I put my faith slightly more in Vivian because Tailwind lost a lot of good users. The best options would be like Murkrow, Talonflame, and Torn right now. So I think Vivian might have a place off of that, especially without having a lot of good Focus Sash options. This could be pretty useful. It could take over Whimsicott's role of being a Sash user. Otherwise, the rest of this tier, they've all had pretty decent success. Stuff like Cole, for example, always a really good Pokemon. Going for Terastal to remove one of your options that are weak to water, sign me up. You'll have options like, for example, Sylveon, which will be great. Just in general, it's a really good Pokemon, especially in Spike Month right now without having to worry about Dynamax. Great option. Noivern's pretty decent as Tailwind. It's another one that I actually forgot to mention. Mudsdale, decent ground, physically defensively, and I think this will be great for stuff like Garchomp, for example, which I think will be some of the better Pokemon. Mimikyu's great for Trick Room, Hat's great for Trick Room, and Sneasler, similar to Weavile, it's one of the better fast options. And while Weavile is great for Ghosts and Dragons, Sneasler would be better for Fairies and Darks. So I think you could actually probably even run these two as a tandem, and they'll probably just go ham on offensive teams. Next up, though, we have the Still Should Expect These tier. This is Pokemon like Gyarados, Zapdos, etc. Gyarados mostly because of Intimidate. Zapdos will both be really good powerhouses. We've seen that consistently this gen, and I don't think that will really change. Especially without the meta having stuff like Coco and Aleki as electric types. Zapdos specifically will have a huge buff as one of the better electrics in the format. And it's a great option on rain teams too, actually. We'll have Gallery Zapdos, great for Intimidate. This is going to be the best option we have as an anti-Intimidator. Gmolt's been a monster. I don't expect that to really change, though it did lose one of its better partners in Compe, which is a little unfortunate. Still will be decent. Dragonite will be great. I think Spike Cuff is proven in a non-Dynamax format. Dragonite's actually not bad this gen. And especially as a weakness policy Pokemon, it's going to be kind of a monster. You could also run this with inner focus sets and just avoid Fake Out, which will also be great because Dynamax is no longer going to exist. Pelipper, best rain setter, no real reason to discuss that anymore. Gastrodon, I think Gastrodon, of anything in this range, weirdly enough, had the biggest argument for maybe going up to top 5-10. There's two other Pokemon that I think could have maybe made that, which are Amoonguss or Thundurus Incarnate. But these three, I think, are the honorable mentions for that top 5-10 slot. Gastrodon's a great option around rain, and it's a Pokemon that, if we look at this top list, is actually pretty obnoxious to KO. Really, the only Pokemon here that could do it just naturally off stab would be Serena, and power up Gyarados, which will be something to see at the very least. Otherwise, you'll need Terrain or Solar Beam Torkoal, so Gastrodon will be a pretty obnoxious wall for this meta. Bronzong, great Trick Room setter. This is probably the best Trick Room setter we have, besides maybe Hatterene would give at least a run for its money, but even still, I think Bronzong's better. Crook, great Intimidate option if you're not running Lando, and in certain matchups, I think this might be better, depending on the Ghost meta, but I think that Lando will just outright class it. Amoonguss will be great. Need I say more? It's Amoonguss, it always is great. Same as Thundurus. Serena's proven this gen priority is such a bitch, and I think that will be a mainstay, albeit I don't think it'll be as good because no Rillaboom in the meta is definitely a pretty big deterrent. At least because Serena was a great Pokemon around Rillaboom because it not only takes advantage of its terrain with its own Grass Stab, but it also avoids both Fake Out and Grassy Glide from Rillaboom, and it's basically one of the best Rillaboom walls. I still think it'll have a place, but it's not going to be like Serena and Spike Cup, I think. Indeedee, as I said, female will be great support with Trick Room. even if it doesn't set its own. Ursaluna, I think, will be an amazing ground type for Trick Room, and I think it's truthfully going to be one of the best Trick Room breakers, besides, like, Torkoal. And then Enamoris, I think both forms will be decent. Therian will be great just as a bulky Trick Room option. It'll be amazing in that regard, in my opinion, as a good special breaker, and the typing's really good. It's a really bulky Pokemon, too. Calm Mind, Weakness Policy sets could be good. Whereas I think that Incarnate will be good, mostly for Contrary, actually. And I think we'll see a lot of physical Enamoris running Incarnate form because of the fact that Contrary can take advantage of Intimidate. And I think this will be a really good low-key take advantage of Intimidate spam, but we'll have to see. As far as the top 5 to 10 range, Arcanine, it's basically just the Incineroar replacement. T-Tar is going to be a great Terrestrial breaker, and I think this will actually be one of the best T-Tar metas we've had in a while, personally. Especially because it's a really good check if you were to go for Terrestrial Dark to check Dragapult, for Terrestrial Rock to check stuff like Salamence, and as well Arcanine too. I think this will be a Pokemon that could, in theory, actually just be a really good anti-top 5-10 Pokemon. And I think it'll be just, in general, a monster. Even without Excadrill, T-Tar is just going to be great. It usually finds a way to be at least viable, and I think this will be a lot better of a meta for it than Gen 7 and 8 were. Torkoal's up next. Torkoal had a phenomenal year, well, past few years, I should say. Even weirdly enough in restricted metas, Torkoal was kind of killing it. I can't see that changing at all this gen. It's going to be one of the best Trick Room breakers. Mence, great Intimidate option. It will be a terrifying Terrestrial Flying Abuser. I think this will be the Intimidate option that Rain teams actually choose, if not Quillfish. Specifically Hisuian Quillfish, actually. But we'll have to see. I think this will be a really good option for Rain. Garchomp was great in Z, and I've compared it on the channel countless times to how I think Z will be the closest gimmick that we've had to Terrestrial. And I think that Garchomp has no reason not to be broken in this. Landorus forms, both will be good. I put Lando Ion here specifically because implying that Sheer Force does get usable again. If Sheer Force is not usable again, which would basically mean that Ability Patch is not in the game, then Lando Ion will be garbage and it will be in the unusable tier. But with Sheer Force, this is kind of a monster. Grim will be pretty unkillable. It's going to be the best prank option we have in the game, despite not having Tailwind. And I think Pult will just be an offensive menace. Terrestrial Ghost will be a great way to give physical sets a strong Ghost option, but we'll have to see. As far as how this changes with the home meta, though, we lose out on a lot of good Pokemon, actually. Specifically, we lose out on both Landorus's, which are pretty incredible for the top tier meta. With this metagame, I think that this is the best place we'll actually see Crook in the entire generation, but Crook might still have a niche place in certain teams, especially as a Moxie Pokemon potentially, and I think that's what its role will shift to once Lando returns. But even still, I think it'll still be a decent Pokemon, offensively speaking, because it's a slightly faster Scarfer, and it's still an Intimidate option that's still pretty valuable as a Ghost Switch in. But I think this will be the best Crook meta we'll have, is the pre-home meta. Other options that are decent that are gone, Lilligant being gone, Hisuian form specifically, is a little bit of an L for Sun teams, and I think that Sun teams will truly thrive actually in the post-home meta, because they lose out on Charizard too, which is another good special breaker for them. But once Charizard and Lilligant enter, I think that Sun will actually have a lot more of a place. Otherwise, Sun's going to just be restricted to Torkoal being there to stop Rain teams from being great, and as just being a good Trick Room breaker. But you won't actually see a Sun team though. Hisuian Arcanine will also be a decent option for Tailwind offensively that's lost. The Zapdoses will be huge losses for Rain and just in general team comps with Galar Zapdos. Other things that are noteworthy here, Thunderous Eye being gone is fucking huge. That's a great support piece for a lot of teams. Basically means that Grim will be like the surefire prankster support Pokemon. Otherwise, we don't actually miss out on a lot though, but the mons we miss out on are really impactful. Oh, Enamoris as well. These two will be really big losses. Ursaluna will be a big loss. As far as what I think the meta will look like, I think we'll see a lot of Mence Arcanine in the non-Lando meta, and at the very least, while I think that Arcanine will still be used as a defensive Intimidate piece, I think that Salamence might not, because its competition with Mence as a Terrestrial Flying option will be pretty high. I still think that both will be decent though, because they do have different benefits. For example, Mence is a great way to boost its speed with Dragon Dance, and I think on solo stab sets where it's no longer worrying about a 4x ice weakness, which also won't be that bad in this meta because of how few ice types are seemingly really good, at least in the returning Pokemon list. I think that Mence could actually have a decent option. As well, I think that when comparing to Landorus, I think that Mence's roles will shift more to Terrestrial Dragon, or just being a Terrestrial Flying option on Rain and going for Hurricane spam. Whereas Landorus will just be more of a non-weather option, I think, for teams, and just be a generally good Intimidate option. As far as other things that really change, I guess, with the pre-home meta, I don't really actually see a lot. I think we'll see a lot more of the viable Pokemon being like in the should. I think basically what I would say is in the viable Pokemon list, I would just outright expect all of these because of how slim the top 5, 10 and the should still expect these lists are. Because we lose a lot of Pokemon in that in those lists. I think we lose about, I want to say, so we lose 2 in the top 5-10 range, and we lose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in the should still expect these range. So we lose like 10 decent Pokemon with these out of, I think, like roughly, I don't know, there's like 9 here, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. So we lose like 10 out of 25. So we nearly lose half of them. So I would say basically just expect everything in the viable Pokemon range in the pre-home meta. We don't lose a lot of these, thankfully, but even still, I think most of our team comps are going to round out of like half of the viable Pokemon and then a couple of the top 5-10 or should expect, if I had to give an honest prediction. But I genuinely don't know. What I do want to know is, though, what are your guys' thoughts for the VGC metagame? And do you want to see more videos like this? If you do, leave a like and subscribe for more. With that said, shout out to channel members being Zeke0, Josh, aka Ultra Player, and Mia. And if you want to become a channel member today, links to do that are down below, as well as to our Discord and Twitter for updates on more videos like this. And with that said, I will see you guys in tomorrow's video. Until then, peace out, guys.